We're in the next to last week of this series that we've called Prepared. And what we're doing in this series is we're talking about embracing God's vision for our lives. So me embracing God's vision for my life, you embracing God's vision for your life. And so we've talked about God has a vision for your life. And for some of us, that's a big surprise. But it's true, God has a vision for your life. And so we talked about being able to see that and to say yes to that. And we've talked about embracing humility, and we've talked about facing our giants and the importance of friendships. And so it's kind of this series is winding down. What I want to talk with you about today is I want to talk with you about how you can find strength from God for yourself as you live out this vision that he has for you in your life. And so we're going to talk about how we draw strength from the Lord and what that could look like for you in your everyday life. And so this series comes from the early part of a guy in the Bible named David. So I say he's probably the second most important person in the Bible. First and far away is Jesus, and then David's probably the second most important person in the Bible. And so he's like King David and David and Goliath. And if you've been with us, you've heard some of the stories, and they're Sunday school stories. They're super famous. So we've been looking at the life of David, and we've been looking particularly at the early part of his life, because in the mid to later part of his life, he was the king of the ancient nation of Israel. But days before that, he was being prepared. And so God's always at work preparing us. He's preparing us for what is, and he's preparing us for what's next. And so we're talking about David, but this series isn't really about David. This series is about God, and it's about you, and it's about me, and it's about how we can embrace God's vision for our life and how we can live that out. And again, I'm really excited that we have this time to talk together today about how you could draw strength from the Lord, all right? So I want to start with this verse that comes from, it's kind of the end of the early season of David's life, all right? So it's these early years, these years of preparation, but it's towards the end of that season, and there's this time in David's life where, this is from 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 6. David was greatly distressed. So greatly distressed. David was greatly distressed. And we're not going to be able to read what happened right before it, but it tells us the third reason. There's three reasons that David was greatly distressed at this point in his life. One is kind of overgeneralization, he'd been fired. Right, so he'd been fired from a job he didn't want. He'd been fired from a job that I really have questions about whether or not it was God's job for him. But regardless, he had been rejected and sent home. All right, so he'd been fired, and he led an army of guys. And so not just David had been fired, like all these guys who were with him had been fired. And so they came from the place they were when they got sent back home. When they got home, they found that enemies had raided their village where they lived and taken all their stuff, all their people. So their wives, their children, their stuff were all gone, kidnapped by this raiding army. And so David has been fired, and his family has been kidnapped, and then the guys that are with him. So David was greatly distressed because the men, his guys, were talking of stoning him. So he's their leader. He's led them into this chaotic circumstance, and their response is like, we're going to throw rocks at him till he's dead. So David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him, and each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. They'd been kidnapped. But David found strength in the Lord his God. So I want to talk with you about how in seasons of great distress, you could find strength in the Lord your God. Because if you're going to embrace God's vision for your life, if you're going to live out God's vision for your life, there are going to be moments for you where you are going to be alone. It's going to be you and God, and what you have to know how to find strength in the Lord your God, because there's not going to be anyone else who's there for you to lean on. And so I want us to talk today about how we can learn to find strength in the Lord our God, particularly in these moments of great distress. And so to help us with that, we're going to we're covering about a 10 to 12 year period of David's life, right? So this section of the Bible is I think it's 12 or 13 chapters that we're gonna talk about today. It's about 15 pages of little print and there are no pictures. So we can't read it all. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna drop into a couple of vignettes from this 10 to 12 year season of David's life. And in these vignettes, we'll find a couple of things that David learned and that we can learn and how we draw strength from the Lord our God. And then we'll finish up our time together today by practicing that and taking communion together. So that's kind of how we're gonna go here for the next little bit. So by way of reminder, God is in process of giving David the kingdom of the ancient nation of Israel, right? He's been anointed as king. There's this 15-ish year waiting period where Saul, who was and is the current king, God is taking the kingdom away from him because he won't listen to God. He won't do what God says. And you can't be the little K king of Israel if you won't do what the big K king of Israel says. And so we're in this period where Saul is falling and David is rising, but Saul has not taken the path of humility and obedience to God. Saul is trying to hang on to his power and he's trying to hang on to his position, and David is just trying to do what's right in all of this. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 11 and 12, Saul figures the best way that he can hold on to his position, the best way that he could hold on to his power is to kill David, to have David killed. Right, so he's tried it a couple times with his spear in the court and has failed there. And so 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 11 and 12, this is early in this 10 to 12 year period. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, and also Saul's daughter, right? So this is Saul's daughter has chosen David over her dad. So Michal, David's wife, says to him, if you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you're gonna be killed. So Michal let David down through a window and he fled and he escaped from Saul's kill him in the morning order, right? So when he fled, he went 4 places really just kind of right away from the way it reads in 1 Samuel chapter 19, 20, 21. So first he goes from his house there around the palace, he goes to Samuel, who was the prophet of God, spoke for God to the people, and Saul chased him to Samuel. Saul found out where he was and he chased him to Samuel, but at Samuel's place, God provided just miraculous provision, miraculous protection for David and for Samuel from Saul. And so David moves on from Samuel to Jonathan, who Greg talked about last week. Jonathan is Saul's son. Jonathan was next in line for kingdom. Saul was gonna pass the kingdom on to Jonathan at some point, but God has inserted David. And David flees to Jonathan and they make a covenant of loyalty to one another. So this was not how it went down in ancient times. Like when power transferred from one family to the next, the family that got the power almost always by coup got the power, exterminated the family of the previous leader. And David and Jonathan, God had knit their hearts together, and so they make a covenant of loyalty to one another. And Jonathan is actually the one who says, man, you gotta go. My dad is trying to kill you. And so David leaves again and he goes to this person named Ahimelech, who was a priest. And while he's with Ahimelech, David tells him a lie that at best could be considered a half-truth. And then he receives from Ahimelech sacred bread that was only for the priest to eat, but there was an exception made, and so David ate the sacred bread because he was hungry, and this is where he picks up Goliath's sword. Because David had to get out of town fast, and so he didn't have any weapon with him, and he knew that Goliath's sword was with Ahimelech the priest, and so he picks up Goliath's sword at Ahimelech, and then from there, he goes to King Achish of Gath. All right, so this is those first 3 things, like they make a little bit of sense. This one makes no sense. He goes to King Achish of Gath. Gath is in the territory of the Philistines. Goliath is from Gath. So David has recently killed Goliath, and now he's on the run from Saul, and he goes back to King Achish of Gath, and what he's doing is seeking asylum, right? So he's seeking asylum with the Philistines, and so while he's there in Gath, he kind of shows up, and 1 Samuel 21, the servants of Achish, the king of the Philistines, king of Gath, they say to him, "Isn't this David, the king of the land?" Not yet, he's not the king yet, but he is the victor, right? "Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence, and while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. So he heard what Achish's servants were saying and knew that he was in danger, and his response to that is to act like he had gone insane. And you can read it a little bit. Achish basically says, "I have enough crazy people in my kingdom already, and I don't need another one. So no, David, you can't have asylum here," right? So that's, David gets away from the danger he's in with Achish because he has pretended to be insane. So in this decade of David's life where he's running from Saul, there are a number of things that David does, like that when I read them, I just put a big question mark next to them, right? Because I don't know. I know I believe he did it. I just don't know that that's what he should have done. And this is one of them. Where let's just start with, he tells a lie to the priest. So he's on the run, he's afraid of Saul, and he's covering some things up, and he tells a lie to a priest because he doesn't know whose side the priest is on, where his loyalties lie. Doesn't know the priest even knows their sides to be taken. He tells a lie to the priest, and then he seeks asylum with the enemies of his people, who are also the enemies of God. And then he pretends to be insane to escape this situation he's put himself in. And then if you read the story in this 10 or 12 years, there's some other things that he does that are, they're just bloody, they're violent. And they were normal for his time, but still, it's not the bloody stuff, the violent stuff. If you read, if you start in maybe Exodus and Joshua and Judges in the early part of the Bible and are reading this direction, you could say, okay, I can see this. But if you start with Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and read it this way, I don't know. So in this decade of David's life, we see him, and I hope I piqued your curiosity enough that you're like, I need to read this, right? You need to read this. Go home today and read through this, and you're gonna see that there's some stuff in this 10 to 12 years of David's life, you'll put a question mark next to it too. And some of it, it's closer to an X than a question mark, right? But he shouldn't have been doing this. And so I've been processing, how do you handle that? How do you handle that? And how do you handle that, looking at what David did, and when you and I find ourselves pushed, how do we handle some of the stuff that we've done and that we'll do when we're pushed? So I've kind of landed in this spot of, I hope it's helpful for you. So here's what I would say over these things that I put a question mark next to in David's life, my life, your life. The first thing to know is somebody else's sin can make your life really messy, right? Somebody else's sin can really complicate your life. David he did not start this thing. This is Saul has decided that David needs to die and has pursued him and has pushed him out. He's put David's life in danger. He's put David's family's life in danger. And David is on the run, and David doesn't know where people's loyalties are. And like he's got to move to stay alive, and he's got to move to keep his family alive. And so he finds himself in some situations. And sometimes you just find yourself in a situation where there is no good answer, right? There's just no good answer. And you can probably think seasons in your life, and I can think of seasons in my life that someone or something happened that it was not my fault. I had no control over it, but here I am. I got to live in this. I got to lead in this. And there's not a good answer. And so because there's not a good answer, I think it's really important to know that there's a lot of grace from God. There's a lot of grace from God for our sin, for our willful disobedience, if our heart is postured towards him and receive his forgiveness and repentance. There's a lot of grace from God, and I think you ought to be willing to receive that. And as you receive grace from God, that allows you to be gracious with yourself. Because you get past some of the things that have happened, you look back at decisions you've made, things you've done in response to stuff that's going on that you had no control over. And if you're receiving grace from God, now you can give grace to yourself, and you can just keep moving forward in that. And then the other piece of that is that, because we're embracing God's vision for our lives, and to have a growth mindset. Because I'm being prepared. I'm being prepared for what is, and I'm being prepared for what's to come. And so maybe I blew it here, but I've received grace. God's given me forgiveness, and there's a next for me, and so I'm gonna learn. And so we get this opportunity to keep moving forward. The amazing thing about God and about his grace and about the vision that he has for your life, and because he's eternal, there's really no permanent mistakes from our perspective. I mean, God has the ability to just pick you up and dust you off and get you back in the game if you're willing to be picked up, dusted off, and put back in the game. So thinking about David and thinking about us, and sometimes you just find yourself in these impossible situations, and then you get a little bit along, and there's these moments where it's like, God can't have a vision for my life, or maybe God has a vision for my life, but I have derailed myself, and no, right? There's no permanent mistakes in these things. Grace from God, grace for yourself, growth mindset. We're just gonna keep moving forward. We keep moving forward in these things. And so David, when he's with Achish of Gath and pretending to be insane, he wrote a psalm. So if you didn't know this, David, who we're talking about today, wrote 73 of the 150 psalms that are in our Bible. So almost half of them. And so he wrote a psalm. He wrote Psalm 34, the psalm he wrote while he was pretending to be insane, while he was in the hand of King Achish of the Philistines. And in Psalm 34, verses 4 and 5, David says this. He says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. And those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. And I just think about David with the false look of insanity that he put on his face and the saliva running down his beard, and looking back in that moment, maybe feeling some shame, but writes this line that I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and he delivered me from my fears, and those who look to him are radiant, and my face isn't covered with shame. My face isn't covered with shame. And so really from what he wrote in Psalm 34, I think the first principle for being a person who draws strength from the Lord when you're in great distress is that first little phrase there, I sought the Lord. I sought the Lord. If you're gonna find strength from the Lord your God, you have to seek him. I sought the Lord. And seek him on purpose with the intention of finding him, right? Of seeking him with with passion and continuing in that posture of, I am pursuing you until I catch you. I'm looking for you until I find you. God's always moving towards you, but you got to move towards him. And in my experience, personally and with people, is when we're in great distress, often we look for God like we're looking for a t-shirt that we can't find, or like a pair of socks that we know is in here somewhere, right? And you look for a minute or two, you look for a couple minutes and you can't find it, and you're just like, okay, I give up on this. There's another shirt somewhere that I can wear. Right? And that's, I sought the Lord, and he answered me. And to seek him until you find him, which means you pray like you mean it, you know? And you stay put until he shows up, or you keep coming back until he shows up with what you need. Jesus, what a beautiful name it is. He's the Lord saves, right? So we seek him until we find him, and we stay there until he shows up. And it's not like I sought him for a little bit and I didn't get what I needed, and so I'm moving on. If you listen to country music, an artist named Jelly Roll has this song when he says, I only talk to God when I need a favor. I only pray when I don't have a prayer. Right? And acknowledging like that's not the way it should be. And the cool thing about God is a savior, God is a rescuer. And so if you are at the end of your rope and you call out to him, like, he will meet you at the end of your rope. Better is before you get to the end of your rope to know where he is and open yourself to him and know how to seek him until you find him. And so if you're gonna be somebody who is able to draw strength from the Lord in great distress, if you're in great distress today, he'll meet you in this. And if you're not in great distress today, you get the opportunity to begin seeking him until you find him, and it just goes way better in that next season of great distress for you. So I sought the Lord to seek him with the intention, for the purpose of finding him. Seek him until you find him. That's the first thing. All right, so this was early in that decade where David's running from Saul, where he writes Psalm 34. If we fast forward towards the end of the decade where he's running from Saul, he's escaped from King Achish by acting insane. He's been moving from place to place for years now, and he's kind of moving around in this place called the Wilderness of Ziph. Great name, right? Wilderness of Ziph. So while he's there, this is in 1 Samuel 23, the Ziphites, so the people who lived in that area, the Ziphites went up to Saul, the king that is chasing David around to kill him, at Gibeah where Saul lived, and they said, is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horish on the hill of Hachilah south of Jeshimon? We know right where he is. Now, your majesty, come down whenever it pleases you to do so, and we will be responsible for giving him into your hands. Saul, we know you're chasing David. We know you want to kill him. We know where he is. When you're ready to take him, you come to us, we'll take you to him, and you can have him. Okay, so here's the Ziphites were a clan which was part of the tribe of Judah. Saul is a member of the tribe of Benjamin. David is a member of the tribe of Judah. These are David's family members who have gone to Saul and said, we know where he is, we'll give him to you. The Ziphites lived 12 to 15 miles from where David grew up. They knew each other. But these were These were his family. And so, like you hear what makes this particularly painful, what creates significant distress for David in this is the betrayal of somebody close to him, somebody that you thought was going to protect you, somebody you thought that would be for you. And they've turned him in, they're turning him over. They do this to him twice. And so in this betrayal, this season of betrayal from these family members, David writes Psalm 54. Psalm 54, he starts and he says, it's just a prayer and it's expressing what's going on, and arrogant foes are attacking me. Ruthless people are trying to kill me, people without regard for God. And then the next psalm, Psalm 55, continues this theme of suffering from being betrayed, from suffering a betrayal. And he's just talking to God, and he says, my thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. This is terrible. I am not doing well. And if I could figure out a way out of this deal, I'd be gone. Let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the realm of the dead, for evil finds lodging among them. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress. And what strikes me in this is the honesty with God, the transparency of what he's feeling and what he wants, the vulnerability with which he expresses that and writes these things down, right? He's not curating an image with God. And he's not looking at all the other trouble in the world and saying, oh, my thing isn't really that bad, right? He's being very real with God, being very honest with himself about where he is and about what's going on. And he's being very real with God about what he's experiencing. And I think this is the second principle for people who want to be able to draw strength from the Lord your God, is being real, being transparent, being vulnerable, being honest with yourself, and being real with God about what's going on in your life, about what you're feeling, about what you're experiencing, what it's doing to you, what you want God to do in this situation, to be real, to be transparent with him. Psalm 55:22, as you get kind of down towards the bottom of this psalm, expressing the difficulty, the distress that he's in, he makes this statement. He says, cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. And if you're going to draw strength from the Lord your God, you've got to know that you can cast your cares on him, right? And you've got to know that he'll sustain you, but you have to actually cast your real cares on him. To be real with him. Not a diminished version. Not it'll be okay. When we lived in Texas, I volunteered to read with these kids in a classroom. And so I had this little kid that they had trouble reading. So for 15 minutes, once a week, we'd sit out in the hallway and he would read to me. And the first 5 minutes of that was just like, hey man, how you doing? Right? And this kid, he was suffering betrayal by a family member, abandonment by a family member. People he's staying with were trying to figure all that out, and he's in 4th grade. So our first 5 minutes, this little boy would say, Dad said he was going to come get me, and he never came and got me. But that's fine. And he would make these statements that for a 4th grader, he should not be experiencing this kind of stuff in his life, and he would finish with, but it's fine. And I just looked at him one day, I said, you know what, it's really not fine. It's not fine that this is happening to you. Right? We do that. Like this little dude had started it in 4th grade, but this is what we do. This is happening to me, but it's fine. That's not how people who find strength in the Lord their God when they're in distress, that's not how they view it. I am in distress. I am in anguish. I have been surrounded and grabbed by fear, terror. This is terrible. This is terrible for me. And I think our tendency to curate an image, the self-talk or curate an image for the people around us have taught us we've got to curate an image for God, that somehow like you've got all kinds of other things to deal with. God, I'm fine. And if you're going to draw strength from the Lord your God, you have to be real with him. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. So fast forward 1,000 years, Peter, one of Jesus' first followers, picks up this theme of casting your care on the Lord. He says in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, he says, give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. Could you just hear that for a second? God cares about you. He cares about you.